Hello and welcome to this FMB webinar on the 14th of June. My name's Hayley Lorimer and I'm Director of Membership Services at the FMB. And I'll be your host for today's webinar. So you're especially welcome to join us if you're a new member joining one of these webinars for the first time. Welcome to the FMB as well as to the webinar. And thank you for joining us today. So our subject matter is a thorny one. It's the topic of VAT, which is something that FMB has been talking about and campaigning about for many, many years. In particular today, we're here to talk about the latest changes around VAT rules on reduced rates for energy efficiency measures, which isn't proving straightforward for members to apply. So luckily for us today, we have our first speaker is Steve McCrindle, who's VAT and customs partner at one of the UK's top 15 accountancy firms and knows everything there is to know about VAT. So Steve's well placed to take us through the background to these changes and some more detail about how this is going to work and how to apply the changes in practice. So if you have any questions as we go through Steve's presentation, then please pop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen and we'll deal with them at the end of the presentation. If anybody has a more complex, specific question about a particular project that they're working on, Steve has kindly said that he can answer questions directly with you on a one-to-one basis as well. Don't worry about noting everything down as we go through the webinar, because we will send you a follow-up email which will have copies of the slides and contact details in it as well as a link to the recording of the webinar if you wanted to watch it over again. Also with us today is Jessica Levy, who is Director of Communications at the FMB, and Jessica's going to update us on FMB's activities in this area around VAT. So I think now I will hand over directly to Steve. Steve, if you want to put your camera on and start your presentation now, that'd be great. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Hayley. As Hayley said, I'm Steve McCrindle. I work for Haines Watts, which is a top 15 accounting firm in the UK. Next slide, please. Just by way of background, I thought it would be useful to run through where we've been with VAT in the UK on energy saving materials. The UK has a reduced rate of VAT for energy saving materials, and it is the lowest a reduced rate can be, which is 5%. The EU back in time thought that the UK had drawn the scope of the reduced rate too widely, and it undertook what are called infraction proceedings against the UK. And that reference below C16114 is the European Court of Justice case reference for the infraction proceedings, being the European Commission against the United Kingdom. The European Court of Justice found against the UK, and the UK had to implement changes. It was directed to do so. And so in 2019, the reduced rate of VAT was limited to supplies to individuals who met certain social conditions, and where if these conditions did not apply, services could be the VAT on the services could be squeezed out from 5% to 20%. Next slide, please. And by example, this is the sort of calculation that businesses had to go through if they had a circumstance where people didn't meet the social criteria. The reduced rate would only apply if the service element of the energy saving material, goods and installation was over 60% of the total cost of the installation. If it wasn't, then Revenue and Customs expected that part of the installation, the service element, would be at the reduced rate and part of it would be standard rated, so 20% UK VAT. The UK was also told by the European Court of Justice that it had to exclude wind and water turbines from the list of qualifying materials. The FMB, amongst other organisations, lobbied for the reversal of the 2019 changes. Her Majesty's Government, HMG, also has a net zero emissions objective. So what you as businesses were looking for, what the FMB was lobbying for, and what the government was trying to achieve was net zero. And that word net zero comes into play very shortly. And the reason why the UK was able to do something about the narrowing of the reduced rate was because following Brexit, we're no longer a part of the EU and we're no longer bound by the results of the infraction proceedings. And the result is that the UK, or the Great Britain part, this excludes Northern Ireland, is permanently reversing the 2019 changes. Next slide, please. As I say, I keep mentioning GB or Great Britain. That's because the changes that I'm going to talk about only apply to England, Scotland and Wales. Northern Ireland is not part of it because of the Northern Ireland Protocol, but there is a levelling up exercise for businesses in Northern Ireland, which is called a Barnett share. Basically, such businesses are given some sort of funding to compensate them for the VAT loss they will experience. Next slide, please. So the overview of the changes are the relief will no longer be restricted by the social policy conditions or the 60% test. Wind and water turbines will be added back to the list of energy saving materials. So that's a complete reversal of the EU infraction proceedings and gives us what we had prior to those proceedings. But the government has gone a step further, and in line with its net zero policy, it's introducing a temporary zero rate of VAT effective from the 1st of April this year, and that will last for 5 years until the 31st of March 2027. So unless the government extends the period of the zero rate, the installation of energy saving materials will revert back to the 5% reduced rate from the 1st of April 2027. Just a personal opinion now, I can't see it happening. I think the reduced rate may be here to stay, but what we have at the minute is just a window of 5 years, and that is the only thing you can bank on here. Next slide, please. So during the 5-year window, the specific changes are that the zero rate will apply to the installation of certain specified energy saving materials that are in or in the curtilage of residential accommodation in Great Britain. The supply of energy saving materials without the installation service is still standard rated. So there must be an installation service to obtain the zero rating of the service and the materials. So I've just put in an example there to help get your head around that. So energy saving materials sold over a counter by a retailer will still be standard rated. And that's because they're just selling the goods. They're not providing an installation service. That would be standard rated. The supply of services of installing certain specified energy saving materials, the installation service, I should say, and not the materials, if supplied in Great Britain, will be zero rated. So you can see that it's the installation service that attracts the zero rating. So if there's no service, the materials are standard rated. If there's a service with materials, it's zero rated. but there has to be a service to obtain the zero rate relief. Next slide, please. And these are, there's a list to follow, but the other thing that was reversed is that wind turbines and water turbines installation of comes within the zero rate, as well as the energy saving materials. So it's basically, we've gone back to what we had prior to the EU's infraction proceedings, but instead of attaching the reduced rate, we now attach the zero rate. So included within the energy saving materials, there's a list there. I'll just look at one or two. Controls for central heating and hot water systems, insulation, solar panels, ground source heat pumps, air source heat pumps, very popular online for some reason. Wood fuel boilers. Next slide, please.
Steve, I'm just giving you your 10-minute warning.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm about on time.
Yeah, seems that way.
Thanks. As I say, the definition for these is virtually on all fours with what we had prior to the EU's infraction proceedings. And you'll find the definition applied in HMRC's guidance. There's a booklet about it. I can't remember the number off the top of my head, but if you look for VAT notices and put energy saving materials in on a Google, you'll find a list of those items. Wind turbines and water turbines, as I've said, are included. The installation of all equipment essential to the operation of turbines, including electrical cables, battery banks, and voltage controllers, are included. Strangely, there's a slight difference between wind turbines and water turbines, because mounting poles are included within the zero rate for wind turbines. There must be something technically specific about that, which I'm unaware of. Next slide, please. There's some grey areas. There always have been grey areas, because in your trade, you're not always just installing energy saving materials. They may be part of a bigger job. You know, it's that plus, or you're doing some sort of construction, and the energy saving materials are just part of the overall construction service. Or somebody might be asking you to do this, and under a separate contract that, and under a separate contract the other. So nothing is ever straightforward in the VAT world. And I've listed here 3 types of grey areas. One is ancillary supplies. And ancillary supplies are supplies that, if you're supplying goods or services, they allow you to better enjoy the principal supply. I'm thinking of an example, but haven't got one in my head at the minute. But there are, I think, for instance, here would be if you were installing a heavy machine somewhere, and you're charging the client, £100,000 for the installation for the machine and the installation of the machine, and you agree to carry out some training. Yeah, that training is ancillary to the main supply, which is the provision of the supply of the goods and the installation service. And it's a better means of enjoying the other. Ancillary supplies would carry the same VAT liability as the main supply, so you could zero rate the lot. It would all have to be under one contract. Yeah, so it's one contract for the total. The ancillary supplies follow the VAT liability of the main supply. And where the main supply is zero rated, your ancillary supply is zero rated. Then there are instances where individual goods and services are provided together, and there isn't one dominant supply. The individual goods and services can stand alone, or they can stand together. The they could be of equal importance, but they could be combined to form something different. So what you need to do there is look at, if they're being provided together under one contract, what is it they produce? What is it that's happening here? And you follow the VAT liability of the supply that's produced overall. Mixed supplies, more than one job at the same time, at the same premises. The VAT liability really depends on the circumstances. If the mixed supplies can all stand alone, but they carry the same VAT liability, who cares? You know, it's all the same VAT liability. But if some are zero rated and some are reduced rated and some are standard rated, you probably want to get those split up so that you charge lower rate VAT on those that can be charged at the reduced rate or the standard rate. Why I mention this, the grey areas, they give all of us problems. They give me problems as a VAT consultant, but they give you headaches as business people. So next slide, please. And what is vitally important here is where you come up against those areas. It's how you contract for the work that is important, but the substance of what you do must be on all fours with a contract. You can't have a contract that says, well, something's red, and the substance of it is that it's actually yellow. You know, the substance must follow the contract, but how you contract for work is vitally important. For example, where it's possible and beneficial, it may be appropriate for you to agree to do all works under one contract and treat the VAT liability of the ancillary works the same as the principal works. So if the principal works are zero rated, you'd want the ancillary works to be so. So you would put that all in one contract for one job. This is one job. Alternatively, where it's possible and again beneficial, it may be appropriate to agree to do some works under a different contract. So for instance, if the predominant supply was standard rated, but there were zero rated elements, when they stand alone, you might want to say to the client, well, let's have a contract for the standard rated works. We'll start those first, and then we'll enter into a contract for the zero rated works, and then we'll start those afterwards. And in that way, as long as the substance of what you're doing follows the contract, or vice versa, whichever way you look at it, then you can obtain VAT benefits. And the benefits go to your customers as well as yourselves. You must ensure that the contracts or the contract are in writing, includes the necessary wording to achieve its purpose, and has been reviewed by your VAT consultant, and has been given legal effect. In other words, VAT consultants are usually not lawyers. So whatever words the VAT consultant says you should include in your contract, from a VAT point of view, you must put that in front of a lawyer who says, yes, I agree with these, or I'll tweak them to say this. That is giving them legal effect. And once they're given legal effect, they're binding on you and they're binding on the customer. Now, I do know that the Federation of Master Builders has a template contract, and it's a simple contract, which you may find beneficial to use as the foundation or the basis for getting into agreements. But I would advise that whatever you do, you must run it past your legal advisor, your lawyer, your solicitor, because that is the only way it will ever mean anything. Okay, next slide, please. And I think that's it from me. The VAT session's finished, but I will be taking questions later when Hayley says questions are available.
Thanks, Steve. I can see we've already got a few really good questions in the Q&A box, but we'll just hold on to those for a moment because I'm going to hand over to ask Jessica now to talk about FMB's activity on the area of VAT. Thanks, Jessica.
Thanks, Hayley, and it's really good to follow Steve. I hope everyone taking part in this webinar as well. So I've been asked just to provide a very short summary of the FMB's broader activities around cutting the VAT and the campaign that hopefully some of you will have heard of in that area. I think Steve's presentation was incredibly helpful, and there's a few real life examples that I'm going to touch on in that. But before I do, for those of you not familiar, the FMB has for many years been running a campaign which we have imaginatively called Cut the VAT. It is based on work with up to 60 organisations across the construction sector and beyond, who have supported our calls for a reduction in VAT on the sorts of works that FMB members are doing. The motivation here is that we know there are a series of issues when it comes to VAT in our part of the construction industry. We know from research that too many customers aim to pay cash for home improvement works in order to avoid VAT, seeing that as something that puts them off. And obviously, as proper quality builders, those sorts of practices aren't ones that FMB members will be condoning, but we understand that while there are builders out there who are willing to offer works under those terms, that is obviously proving difficult from a sort of business competition perspective. We know that the VAT costs roughly deter around 4 million homeowners from even wanting to do improvement works on their homes in the first place, which is obviously not good news for the business. So it's a long-running campaign, like I say, and we've taken this campaign to government, in the media, provided moments on social media, have a strong hashtag, hashtag cut the VAT, which hopefully you have seen, and for those of you on social media have also used if you've been involved in some of our campaigning activity. As Steve set out, obviously this change has now happened to an aspect of works in the building industry, those specifically related to energy efficiency. And this was something that the FMB has been campaigning with other organisations for. About a year ago, we produced some research with the RICS and with CBI Economics, specifically about the benefits from cutting VAT in terms of providing an economic stimulus, but also providing loads of job potential from the sort of incentives that would create for consumers wanting to get more works done in their home, wanting to employ more builders, therefore more people wanting to come into the industry, seeing the benefits and the job creation potential from that. We also continue to campaign around the sort of broader point of cutting the VAT. So that's the main message that I really want to just leave members with today, is that even though the changes as outlined by Steve are progress in this campaign, we absolutely acknowledge that it is not over, that this is a VAT reduction on an important but only an aspect of what all of you do. And that the broader campaign to cut the VAT across the board on RMO work continues. It's something that we were using our presence in the media just this week to talk about in response to latest figures about growth in the economy. We definitely see the strong case for a VAT cut, even a temporary one, being a really great stimulus to keep the RMI market healthy and keep consumers wanting to commission work. So while we appreciate that there are some difficulties, and I think the grey areas that Steve pointed out in his presentation are the bits that if you watch this again when we have it on record, I would definitely draw people's attention to. I think those grey areas are particularly important. So the example of, for example, you're doing a home extension for a client, and as part of that you are adding some solar panels, or you're putting insulation in that situation, doing that all as one job. The prevailing rate would be the one linked to the extension rather than the insulation measures. But splitting it out into 2 contracts, as Steve has suggested, could be a way forward. So there are some tricks there, which Steve has helpfully set out, which hopefully will be beneficial. But we do recognise that this is one step in the right direction, but it's not the whole journey. And the FMB is continuing its commitment to work to reduce VAT across the board. It's obviously difficult, and the government has got lots of things to contend with, but we're going to keep banging the drum for this particular change, because we do really see the benefits, and we know it's something that's important to FMB members. Thanks, Hayley.
Okay, thank you for that update, Jessica. That's really helpful. Steve, if I can ask you to pop your camera back on so that we can see you, and we'll attempt to answer some of these questions, which are, I think some of them are directly about the grey area that Jessica just referred to, actually. If I could start with this question from James. He's asked, if they supply low temperature radiators as required by an air source heat pump, can that be considered an ESM? I was wondering about that as you were talking about the ancillary measures, because I suppose the same could apply if, say, a building has a damp problem, then there's no point installing any kind of heating and insulation whilst that damp is still there. So you'd have to fix that first. So I suppose the grey area is how far your ancillary measures extend, isn't it, really?
I think if the new radiators are necessary because of the heat pump, the energy saving heat pump being installed, for instance, the caliber of the pipe is different, and therefore the radiator fittings have to be different, and you need different radiators because the water comes through at a different temperature or whatever.
Yeah.
So if the radiators and the pipes, etc., are all necessary and consequential on the new heat pump, yeah, the heat pump is the principal supply, and they are ancillary to it. So I would say the whole lot there are part of the energy saving materials and could be zero rated. However, if that's not necessary as part of the work, if you don't need new piping, you don't need new radiators, it's just that the house, that the homeowner decides they would like new ones, then I think they would not be zero rated. The energy saving heat pump would be, but the radiators and pipework wouldn't be.
I think James's question implies that if you're installing an air source heat pump, that you have to have low temperature radiators to go alongside it, so it would be ancillary.
It would be ancillary.
That's helpful, thanks, Steve. But as you've just said, you know, you would say that that's an ancillary measure, but I guess at the end of the day, HMRC needs to agree that it's an ancillary measure, don't they? And another member's asked a question on that particular issue. He's asked, is there a reliable way to get HMRC to sign off the approach pre-contract? Previously, the answer's always been no, but I live in hope. So I guess that would provide reassurance if they would, wouldn't it?
Well, the answer is still no.
Yeah.
A member of my team was on the phone 2 hours this morning just trying to get a simple answer out of Revenue and Customs. Have you got this or not? 2 hours, you know, just for something simple, but important to the client.
If you can get through to them at all.
Absolutely. So Revenue and Customs used to, in the old days, give rulings. They don't give rulings anymore. What they do is statutory clearances, but they'll only do that where their published guidance doesn't provide the answer. And even if it doesn't provide the answer, they will say, well, if the answer is so simple that you shouldn't be asking us the question, then go away. They're very unhelpful, extremely unhelpful. And a statutory clearance is, it's like taking a sledgehammer to crack a nut. some of the questions are, I'm trying to save the homeowner £1,000, and the cost of getting the statutory ruling is like 3,500. It's prohibitive. So unfortunately, no. And it is the case that the business supplying the service is the one at risk if it doesn't charge VAT at the correct rate. So all you can do is the leaflet that I was referring to and couldn't remember the number of before, and it's called Energy Saving Materials and Heating Equipment, and it's VAT notice 708/6. If that doesn't give you the answer, then I think you need to pick up the phone to your VAT advisor, whoever that may be, and ask them to give you some advice. Because if they give you wrong advice, then you can sue them. So you might get a bill from Revenue and Customs, but it isn't your fault because you were advised to do that, and you can sue your advisor then. Yeah,
mind you, suing people's expensive, Steve, isn't it? Always best to stay out of court.
It can be.
Yeah. Oh dear. So the whole thing is, that I guess that's what members are wary of, isn't it? Is that element of risk around getting it wrong.
Well, I think HMRC, and I've no axe to grind with HMRC. I worked for them once upon a time, many years ago. It's where I started, and I loved it there. But they used to be helpful. They helped people when I worked for them, and I still think they should. But there's nothing, absolutely no help. And HMRC is part of the civil service, and the second word in that duo is service, and you wonder where the service comes from now.
Well,
anyway, enough of that.
James has also asked about where the most extensive list of actual items that might be considered ESMs might be found, and I think that's in that VAT notice 708/6 that you've just referred to. We will put a note of that reference number in the follow-up email as well, so that members can take
it. As well as giving a list, it also elaborates about things as well. Right. So you can scroll down, and it's pretty good. It's pretty good, but it doesn't cover everything. It can't cover everything.
Okay, so here's an example for you from one of the members who says, presumably, if we source energy saving measures from a supplier and pay the 20% VAT, but then charge our clients for both the energy saving measure and its installation as a combined package, then we're charging the zero rate. Do we reclaim the VAT through our normal VAT return in the normal way?
Absolutely.
Right.
Yeah. Okay. The zero rate of VAT is still a rate. It's still a taxable supply. You can make taxable supplies at the standard rate, the reduced rate, or the zero rate. And if you make taxable supplies, you're allowed to recover VAT that you incur on the costs of materials and services you incur in providing that service. Except in the building trade, most builders will know that there are blocked goods that you can't recover VAT on. So if you're a house builder, you can't recover VAT on white goods and brown goods and things like that. So there are natural blocks, but generally, yes, you can recover VAT. The energy saving materials, if you're paying 20% VAT on the purchase of, and you sell that on at the zero rate because it's part of the package of the installation service and the goods, you can recover the VAT on the purchase of the goods.
Okay. So James has also asked, invariably when they do a major renovation project of around 250k plus VAT at 20%, most projects now include major insulation upgrades as well as ground source or air source heat pumps. Should these be done on split contracts, or can they use a single contract but charge different rates as long as there's an explanation for the different rates within the contract?
Are these new builds?
No, he says major renovations.
Renovations, yeah, he did say that, yes.
Yeah.
But new builds, it shouldn't be an issue because most new builds are zero rated anyway.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I see the problem. He's going to be providing either reduced rated or standard rated services. For example, taking a commercial building and converting it into flats. My view on that would be that if you have a single contract, it's easier for revenue and customs to argue against there being two separate supplies.
Right.
They would say, and wouldn't they, because it's their job, that it's been artificially split out. So my preference would be to go for two separate contracts.
Okay.
It could. I like to see two separate contracts and the work being done at slightly different times. But it could be that James, his business, agrees with the client that he'll carry out a refurbishment, to include the heat source, the heat pumps, etc.,
and the insulation,
but doesn't stipulate that it's energy saving, and then separately agrees that that will be changed. So that part of it will be changed, and it's now going to be energy saving materials supplied under a separate contract. Yeah.
Okay.
That
So
would be the best way to do it.
You'd refer to the second contract in the first contract?
No.
I'm thinking that we probably need to speak to FMB's legal advisors around our template contracts, and perhaps providing some guidance to members who are trying to use them in this way.
It's called in my trade mutual exclusivity.
Right.
So you know they're connected, but you can't see the connection because they're in different contracts, signed at different times and done at different times.
Okay.
I don't know if it's practically. I don't know if it's a practical solution for James. There may be an impracticality in doing that, but surely there'll be opportunities to do so.
Okay. So another member, we're giving you a good grilling this afternoon, Steve. Plenty of questions coming. So somebody has asked, they run a roofing company and install insulation as part of the flat roofing system that they use, which provides energy saving benefits for their domestic clients. Can they charge the whole flat roofing system as zero rate as an ancillary product?
The flat roofing system, what's a flat roofing system? Or they're just putting a new flat roof in? Yeah,
but there'll obviously be a manufacturer's designed system with different elements that go together to make a watertight, energy efficient flat roof.
Well, then you've got to look at the work that you're doing overall and say, well, materially, what is the principal supply? I would say, as a layman, and this is the only way I'm answering, is that the flat roof is what you're installing, and that the energy saving materials are just part of that. It might be an integral part of it, but it's not. Value wise, it's probably a smaller value, or a less consequential value. So I think there you've got the opposite effect, that the energy saving materials could become standard rated.
Okay. It is complex, isn't it?
It's very complicated.
Yeah. So on that theme, one of our members, Greg, has actually commented that he's still a bit confused by all of this, and the webinar hasn't cleared up some of that fog for him. So sorry, Greg. Steve's tried his best to get a complex subject and boil it down to its most straightforward presentation, but it just is complicated, isn't it? And we ought to be wrapping up the webinar now, because we have been going for 40 minutes, and I'm sure Steve probably needs a rest and a cup of tea before he gets on his train. Well,
if Greg wants to contact me separately and we can discuss his particular circumstances, happy for him to do so.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Thanks for that. Before I close the webinar, I am going to launch a poll to just get feedback from all of you attending, if you don't mind taking a couple of extra seconds to do that, on how helpful you have found this webinar. Because we find that having you as a captive audience means that you will respond to the questions before you head off for the day. So I'm just going to launch the poll now, which is asking, how helpful have you found this webinar? And I think I know the answer as far as Greg's concerned, because he's already given us that comment. But I can see that the answers are coming in. I'll leave that for a second or two. Okay, we've got over 90% of attendees have clicked that they found their content okay or very helpful. 3 members attending have either still got unanswered questions or haven't found the content that helpful. So they may need to contact you separately, Steve, after this. Don't forget also that there is guidance on the FMB website. We'll send a link to that in the follow-up email as well. And you also have access to the FMB's VAT and taxation helpline. We'll put the number for that in the follow-up email as well. And I've got one final poll to launch, which will literally take you a couple of seconds to complete, which is just about what's the best time of day for you for attending webinars, because obviously we want to be as useful as we can to members and you know, provide these sessions at the time of day when it's easiest for them to attend. So I've just launched that on the screen, which is offering you the options of first thing in the morning, lunchtime, afternoon, like this, or during the evening when you're perhaps catching up with your paperwork. So it's just a quick straw poll on that, obviously. And the fact that you're all here at 4:30 in the afternoon would indicate that that's a good time of day for you, of course. But anyway, it's helpful to us to have that feedback. So thank you. I think almost everybody has participated in that, and it's telling us that afternoon is the most popular time of day, followed by evening after 6 p.m. So thank you for that. We can use that information in our webinar planning going forward. Okay. So it just remains for me to say thank you very much to Steve for his time this afternoon. Thank you to all of you for attending. Thanks to Jessica as well for her update on behalf of the FMB. And I hope everybody continues to stay safe, and you will get the follow-up email with links to all of the resources that we've mentioned, and good luck grappling with your VAT issues. Okay, thank you very much. Goodbye.
Thank you.